The Los Angeles sun beat down on the cracked pavement of Compton, its relentless heat shimmering in waves above the asphalt. For 17-year-old Leo Martinez, this heat was a constant companion, just like the faint buzz of his old amplifier. Inside his cramped bedroom, posters of Tupac, Ice Cube, and Snoop Dogg watched over him like guardian angels of rhythm and rhyme. He hunched over his makeshift desk, a tangle of worn-out cables and a second-hand laptop, his only tools for chasing an audacious dream that felt miles away from his reality. Leo's fingers, calloused from both guitar strings and after-school work, meticulously adjusted the knobs on his mixing board. The device, a relic from a pawn shop, crackled and hissed with every touch, a grumpy old man protesting being woken from its slumber. He was preparing for the annual Compton Rising Talent Showcase, an event that felt like his one and only shot. His lyrics were his soul laid bare, verses filled with the sights and sounds of his neighborhood. The distant wail of sirens, the laughter of kids playing stickball, and the quiet dignity of his hard-working mother. The day of the showcase arrived, heavy with a mixture of smog and anticipation. The community center buzzed with nervous energy, a kaleidoscope of aspiring singers, dancers, and poets. Leo felt a knot tighten in his stomach, the weight of his own expectations pressing down on him. He clutched his beat-up electric guitar, its wood scarred with the history of his hopes and frustrations. This was more than a performance. It was prayer, a desperate plea to be seen, to be heard, to be more than just another face in the crowd. He watched from the wings as other acts took the stage, their polished routines and new equipment a stark reminder of his own limitations. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drum beat accompanying the confident pop song currently filling the auditorium. He whispered his lyrics to himself, the words a familiar mantra against the rising tide of fear. He wasn't just doing this for himself. He was doing it for his mother, who worked 2 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads, always encouraging his musical ambitions. Finally, his name was called. The spotlight felt like an interrogation lamp, hot and unforgiving, as he walked to the center of the stage. He plugged in his guitar, took a deep breath, and gave the sound tech a hesitant nod. The silence of the room was a vast ocean, and he was about to cast his small, fragile bottle of a song into it. He looked out at the sea of faces, a blur of strangers who held his dream in their hands for the next 3 minutes. He struck the first chord, but instead of the crisp, soulful sound he had practiced 1,000 times, a deafening screech of feedback ripped through the speakers. A collective wince went through the audience. He tried again, his fingers fumbling on the frets, but the amp only responded with a garbled, monstrous roar. Panic seized him, cold and sharp. The sound tech frantically gestured from the side, but it was no use. His gear had betrayed him at the most critical moment. The initial shock in the crowd curdled into scattered snickers and whispers. Leo stood frozen, the silence that followed the feedback more humiliating than the noise itself. He could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on him, their pity and second-hand embarrassment a physical weight. He mumbled an apology into the microphone, his voice barely a whisper, and quickly walked off the stage, the sounds of his failure echoing in his ears. The vibrant colors of his dream had bled out into a dull, humiliating gray. Backstage, the world was a muffled blur. He unplugged his guitar with trembling hands, avoiding the sympathetic glances from the other performers. Each pat on the back felt like a nail being hammered into the coffin of his musical aspirations. He pushed through the backstage door and out into the cooling evening air, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. But Leo didn't see the beauty. He only saw the closing of a door he had desperately tried to kick open. Walked home, the heavy amplifier in one hand and his silent guitar case in the other. The usual sounds of the neighborhood, the bass from a passing car, the chatter from front porches, seemed to mock his own silence. In his room, the posters of his idols now seemed to stare at him with accusing eyes. He gently placed his guitar against the wall, not with the reverence of a musician, but with the finality of someone laying a part of themselves to rest. That night, sleep offered no escape. He tossed and turned, the screech of feedback replaying in his mind like a broken record. He had poured all his vulnerability, all his hope, into that one performance, only to have it shatter in the most public way possible. He felt stripped bare, his passion now a source of deep shame. The dream that had once been his driving force, was now a painful reminder of what he believed he could never be. A video of the incident, filmed on a shaky phone, inevitably found its way online. Titled "Compton Showcase Epic Fail," it quickly made the rounds on local social media pages. The comments were a brutal mix of mockery and pity. For Leo, each view, each laughing emoji, was another grain of salt rubbed into his rawest wound. He shut his laptop, determined to sever his connection to the digital world that was celebrating his downfall. The next few days were a hollow existence. Leo went through the motions of his life, his spirit muted. He took extra shifts at his part-time job, the monotonous work a welcome distraction from the creative void that now filled his mind. Music was a ghost in his life, a phantom limb he could still feel but could no longer use. He had decided, with the grim certainty of a broken heart, that his journey as a musician was over. In the heart of South Central, in a small, cluttered office filled with books and community awards, sat Pops Malone, a retired social worker, and a revered elder in the community. Pops had seen generations of kids navigate the treacherous path of adolescence in Los Angeles. His face was a roadmap of laugh lines and worry, and his presence commanded a quiet respect that transcended street affiliations. He spent his days mentoring, mediating, and fighting for the forgotten youth of his city. Pops scrolled through his social media feed with a sigh, weary of the negativity that so often dominated the digital space. Then he saw it. The video of Leo's disastrous performance. He watched past the shaky camera work and the cruel title, his trained ear listening for something else. Beneath the horrific feedback and the boy's visible panic, he heard it. A flicker of raw, undeniable talent in the few clean notes that escaped the amp's chaos, and a profound vulnerability in the lyrics that briefly flashed on screen. He clicked on Leo's profile, linked in the comments by someone who knew him. He saw a handful of older videos, poorly lit and with fuzzy audio, but they were enough. In them, Pops saw a young man with a poet's soul and a musician's hands. He heard stories of struggle and resilience woven into intricate melodies, a voice that spoke the truth of their shared environment. Pops felt a familiar fire ignite in his belly, the righteous anger he always felt when potential was about to be extinguished by circumstance. He knew this was a critical moment. Humiliation was a powerful poison, especially for a young man. It could curdle ambition into lifelong resentment and insecurity. Pops closed his eyes, thinking of all the talent he had seen lost to the streets, to despair, to a simple lack of support. He refused to let this kid become another statistic, another what-if story whispered on street corners. Leo needed more than a pat on the back. He needed a lifeline. Pops picked up his phone, his mind already formulating a plan. He had connections, favors he could call in, relationships built over decades of community work. He knew two men who had walked this exact path, who had turned the grit of these same streets into a global empire of art and enterprise. They were more than celebrities. They were symbols of what was possible. It was a long shot, a ridiculously audacious idea, but Pops had built his reputation on long shots. He first dialed a private number he rarely used. After a few rings, a familiar, laid-back voice answered. "Pops, what's crackin'?" It was Snoop Dogg. Pops explained the situation, his tone urgent and passionate. He sent Snoop the link to the video, telling him to listen past the noise and hear the kid's heart. He knew Snoop, beneath the cool exterior, had a deep love for his community, and a soft spot for young talent trying to find their way. Next, he called an equally guarded number. This time, the voice on the other end was sharper, more direct. "Pops, what's the word?" It was Ice Cube. Pops repeated his plea, framing it not just as a matter of music, but of community pride and responsibility. He appealed to Cube's well-known persona as a fierce advocate for authenticity and a mentor to those coming up behind him. He knew Cube would respect the kid's raw, unfiltered storytelling. While Pops set his plan in motion, Leo was oblivious, trapped in his gray world. He was at the local park, shooting hoops by himself, trying to sweat out the feelings of failure that clung to him like the city's smog. He heard some younger kids nearby talking and laughing, and then he heard it, a distorted screech from one of their phones, followed by uproarious laughter. They were watching his video. He felt his face flush with heat, the shame as fresh as it was on stage. He grabbed his basketball and quickly left, his shoulders hunched. The incident confirmed his decision to quit. The world had told him, in no uncertain terms, that he wasn't good enough. His dream was now a public joke. He walked home, the bounce of the basketball on the pavement the only rhythm in his life now. He was building a wall around his heart, brick by painful brick, to ensure he would never feel that kind of humiliation again. He arrived home to find his mother waiting for him at the kitchen table, her face etched with concern. She had seen the video, not because she was looking for it, but because a neighbor had shown it to her, thinking it was funny. She saw the pain in her son's eyes, the way he carried himself as if he were trying to disappear. She didn't press him, but simply said, "Mijo, your talent is a light. Don't let one broken wire turn it off." Her words were meant to comfort, but they only twisted the knife. His light felt very much extinguished. That night, he took the posters of Snoop Dogg and Ice Cube down from his walls. He couldn't bear to look at them anymore. They represented a world he had tried to enter, a club whose doors had been slammed shut in his face. He packed them away carefully, a final somber ritual to mark the end of an era. Little did he know, miles away in their respective homes, two icons were watching a shaky video on their phones. They saw past the technical failure and the teenage awkwardness. They saw the hard concrete of Compton. They heard the echo of their own beginnings, and they saw a kid who, like them, had a story to tell. Pops Malone's audacious plan was in motion, about to cause a tremor that would shake the very foundations of Leo's world. In his sprawling mansion, Snoop Dogg leaned back in a custom-made studio chair, a haze of fragrant smoke hanging in the air. He watched the video of Leo for a third time, his brow furrowed in concentration. The laid-back king of cool persona faded, replaced by the sharp focus of a seasoned veteran. He heard the clumsy desperation, but underneath it, he heard the funk. It was in the boy's timing, in the hint of a melody that fought to be heard. It was raw, but it was real. He thought back to his own beginnings, the hunger, the feeling that you had to scream to be heard over the noise of the world. He saw that same fire in Leo's eyes before the panic set in. Pops was right. This wasn't just some kid messing around. This was a young artist on the verge of either breaking through or breaking down completely. Snoop picked up his phone and sent a short text. "I'm in. What's the plan?" Meanwhile, in his own state-of-the-art home office, Ice Cube watched the same video with an analytical eye. He muted the audio of the feedback and focused on the visuals, the kid's posture, his fingerings on the guitar, the way he closed his eyes just before the disaster. Cube saw passion and intent. He then unmuted the beginning, catching the few clear notes and the earnestness in Leo's voice. He recognized the G-Funk influence, the storytelling tradition of the West Coast. Cube, the architect of NWA and a man who had built an empire on unflinching truth, felt a sense of duty. He had always preached about ownership, about building your own platform when the world denies you one. This kid had tried to build something with broken tools. He deserved a proper chance, a solid foundation to stand on. He texted Pops back, his message as direct as his rhymes. "He's got something. Let's see him. Send the address." Pops Malone, sitting in his small office, looked at the two text messages on his phone, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across his face. He knew he could count on them. They hadn't forgotten where they came from. He coordinated a time, deciding that a surprise visit would have the most impact. This wasn't about a charity case. It was about an intervention, a passing of the torch. He texted the details to both of them, his heart swelling with hope for the young man who was completely unaware. The next afternoon, a sleek, black Escalade, a vehicle that screamed celebrity, purred to a stop on Leo's quiet, residential street. A few curtains twitched in neighboring houses. Then, a second, equally impressive car, a classic '64 Impala, pulled up behind it. The driver's side door of the Escalade opened, and out stepped Ice Cube, clad in his signature black attire, his expression unreadable behind dark sunglasses. The community held its breath. From the Impala, the lanky figure of Snoop Dogg emerged, a cloud of smoke following him like an aura. He surveyed the quiet street with a calm, knowing look. The two men, titans of hip-hop who had once been rivals, now stood together on a Compton sidewalk, united by a common purpose. They met in the middle, exchanging a nod of mutual respect before turning their attention to the small, unassuming house in front of them. Inside, Leo was in the living room, helping his mom fold laundry, the television droning on in the background. He was still in a funk, the world feeling muted and colorless. Suddenly, a sharp knock echoed through the house. It was firm, confident. Leo's mother, wiping her hands on her apron, went to answer it, expecting a neighbor or a package delivery. She opened the door and her jaw dropped, her eyes wide with disbelief. Leo, curious about her silence, came to see who was at the door. He peered over his mother's shoulder and his brain short-circuited. Standing on his porch, as real as the worn-out doormat beneath their feet, were Ice Cube and Snoop Dogg. For a moment, he was sure he was dreaming, that the grief of the past few days had finally caused him to hallucinate. He just stared, his mouth agape, unable to form a single word. Snoop Dogg broke the silence, his voice smooth and familiar. "Leo Martinez?" he asked, a gentle smile playing on his lips. "We heard you was having some technical difficulties. Thought we might be able to help with that." Ice Cube simply nodded, his intense gaze seeming to look right through Leo, assessing the young man who stood before him, speechless and trembling. Leo's mother, recovering from her shock, ushered them inside with flustered, reverent hospitality. The two icons stepped into the humble living room, their larger-than-life presence making the small space feel even smaller. Leo was still frozen, his mind racing to comprehend the impossible reality of the situation. The men from the posters he had just taken down were now standing in his living room, talking about his epic failure. Ice Cube got straight to the point, his voice leaving no room for ambiguity. "Pops Malone sent us. He and we think you got a story to tell," he said, his eyes locking with Leo's. "The question is, are you gonna let a busted amp be the end of that story, or are you gonna learn how to build your own damn microphone?" The words hit Leo like a physical blow, a direct challenge to the wall of despair he had built around himself. For the first time in days, a flicker of the old fire returned to Leo's eyes. It was a mixture of terror and a wild, electrifying hope. This was insane, it was impossible, but it was happening. He looked from Snoop's encouraging smile to Cube's demanding stare, and knew this was a turning point, a crossroads presented to him by the very architects of the music that had shaped his life. His answer would define his future. Can you even imagine? Your heroes showing up at your front door to pull you out of your darkest moment. It's the stuff of dreams. If you're feeling inspired by Snoop and Cube's incredible act of mentorship, do us a favor and hit that like button right now. Let us know in the comments who would be your dream mentor. Alright, don't go anywhere. The story is just getting started, and you don't want to miss how they rebuild Leo from the ground up. The days that followed were a surreal blur for Leo, a masterclass in music and life taught by two living legends. The first session took place, not in a fancy studio, but right back in his bedroom. Snoop and Cube wanted to understand his process, his environment, his sound in its rawest form. They sat on his bed, listening intently as he, with trembling hands, played his songs on his old acoustic guitar, his voice still shaky with disbelief. Snoop Dogg was the vibe master, the Quincy Jones of G-Funk. He taught Leo how to find the pocket of a beat, how to let his words ride the rhythm instead of fighting it. "It ain't just what you say, nephew. It's how you let it breathe," Snoop would advise, his head nodding slowly. The silence between the words, that's where the soul is. Let the music talk to you, then you talk back. He encouraged Leo to experiment, to be more playful with his flow. Ice Cube, on the other hand, was the lyricist, the architect of the narrative. He was sharp, demanding, and pushed Leo to dig deeper. "Why this word? What are you really trying to say?" he would challenge, dissecting Leo's verses line by line. "Your reality is your power. Don't just tell us you're from Compton, show us. Make us smell the pavement after it rains, make us feel the hope on the basketball court." He forced Leo to sharpen his storytelling, to make every word count. The mentorship extended beyond the music. They took him out for food, not to fancy restaurants, but to the iconic spots in their old neighborhoods, Tam's Burgers and Roscoe's. They shared stories of their own struggles, their early failures, the times they were told they wouldn't make it. They were demystifying their own legends, showing him the hard work and perseverance behind the platinum records and blockbuster movies. They were teaching him resilience. Then came the day they took him to a real studio. It was Cube's private facility, a technological marvel that made Leo's old equipment look like something from the Stone Age. He walked into the control room, his eyes wide as he took in the massive mixing board, the racks of pristine equipment, and the soundproofed walls. This was the temple he had only ever dreamed of, and he was being welcomed inside. The first few hours in the studio were a struggle. Leo was hit with a paralyzing case of imposter syndrome. The professional environment, the weight of his mentor's expectations, it was all too much. He fumbled his lyrics, his voice cracked, and his creative instincts froze. He was the kid with the broken amp again, failing on a much grander stage. He felt the familiar shame creeping back in, whispering that he didn't belong here. Cube noticed his struggle immediately. He stopped the session, took Leo aside, and looked him straight in the eye. "Forget about me and Snoop. Forget about the studio. This is your story. We're just here to help you get the levels right," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "You earned your spot in this room the moment you decided to write about your life instead of just accepting it. Now go in there and tell your truth." Snoop chimed in, putting a calming hand on Leo's shoulder. "Everybody gets the yips, nephew. Even the Dogg father," he said with a grin. "Just close your eyes. Picture your block. Picture your mom. Picture why you started doing this in the first place. The rest is just noise." Their combined words acted as an anchor, pulling Leo back from the brink of his own self-doubt. He took a deep breath, centered himself, and walked back to the microphone. Something clicked. He began his song again, but this time he wasn't performing for them. He was speaking for himself. The words flowed effortlessly, filled with the pain, hope, and love he felt for his community. His voice, now captured by a world-class microphone, was rich and clear, every nuance of his emotion perfectly preserved. Snoop and Cube watched from the control room, no longer mentors, but fans. Over the next week, they worked tirelessly, building a song from the ground up. Snoop helped craft a beat that was pure West Coast soul, a head-nodding groove that felt both classic and fresh. Cube helped Leo refine his lyrics into a razor-sharp narrative, an anthem that was both deeply personal and universally relatable. Leo blossomed under their guidance, his confidence growing with every take. He was learning the technical side of production, how to layer sounds, how to mix tracks, how to be the master of his own creative vision. He soaked up their knowledge. Like a sponge, his passion for music reignited into a roaring fire. He was no longer just a kid with a guitar. He was an artist, finding his voice, backed by the wisdom and experience of two of the greatest to ever do it. The final product was a masterpiece. The song, titled "Concrete and Sunflowers," was a powerful ode to life in Compton. It spoke of the hardship, the concrete, but also of the resilience and beauty that grows in spite of it, the sunflowers pushing through the cracks. It was Leo's story, but it was also the story of his entire neighborhood. He had finally built his own microphone, and the message was loud and clear. With the song complete, a powerful, polished anthem that pulsed with the heartbeat of the streets, the question became what to do with it. A record label deal or a viral video launch seemed like the obvious next steps, but Snoop and Cube had a different vision. They knew that for the song to truly have an impact, it had to be given back to the community that inspired it. The victory wouldn't be a chart position. It would be the pride on the faces of Leo's neighbors. "We ain't just gonna drop this online, nephew," Snoop said as they listened to the final mix in the studio. "This here is a neighborhood record. It belongs to the block." Ice Cube nodded in agreement, his mind already working on the logistics. "We're going to throw a free block party, right in your neighborhood. No big promoters, no tickets, just for the people. And you," he said, pointing at Leo. "You're the headliner." The idea terrified and thrilled Leo in equal measure. A comeback performance, right on his home turf, for the very people who had witnessed his most humiliating failure. It was a chance at redemption on the highest possible stakes. But this time, he wasn't the scared kid with broken gear. He was an artist, armed with a powerful song and the backing of his heroes. He agreed without hesitation, a determined fire in his eyes. Word of the block party spread like wildfire. Snoop and Cube's involvement meant it was more than just a local event. It was news. But they kept the focus tight, using their influence to bring in resources, not to overshadow the event's purpose. They arranged for a professional stage and sound system to be set up in the local park, the very same one Leo had fled in shame just weeks before. They organized food trucks to provide free meals, turning it into a true community celebration. What happened next was a testament to the power of community. As word got out that this was for Leo, for one of their own, people started to step up. The local barber offered free haircuts for kids before the event. The owner of the corner store donated water and sodas. A group of mothers organized a volunteer cleanup crew. The same people who had shared the video of Leo's failure were now sharing flyers for his comeback. Leo saw the shift firsthand. People who used to avert their eyes now greeted him with smiles and words of encouragement. The younger kids who had laughed at him now looked at him with a sense of awe. They saw the Escalade and the Impala parked on their street, saw the flurry of activity in the park, and understood that something special was happening because of him. He wasn't a joke anymore. He was a source of pride. He spent the days leading up to the block party rehearsing, not just the song, but his own stage presence. Snoop coached him on how to command a stage, how to connect with the crowd, while Cube helped him mentally prepare for the pressure. They weren't just his producers anymore. They were his cornermen, getting him ready for the main event. His confidence, once a fragile seedling, was now a sturdy oak. The day of the block party, the weather was perfect. A classic Southern California afternoon, sunny and warm with a gentle breeze. The park was transformed. A vibrant stage stood where there was usually just grass, and the air was filled with the smell of barbecue and the sound of classic West Coast beats spun by a local DJ. The entire neighborhood, it seemed, had turned out. Families laid out blankets on the grass. Old-timers played dominoes, and kids ran around, their faces painted. Pops Malone was there, a proud smile on his face as he watched the scene unfold. He saw rival gang members nodding at each other, families that hadn't spoken in years sharing a laugh. The block party was more than just a concert. It was a temporary truce, a sanctuary. The song they had created, Concrete and Sunflowers, had already begun to work its magic, even before it was performed. Backstage, which was just a small tent behind the stage, Leo felt the familiar pre-show jitters, but this time, they were different. It wasn't the cold dread of fear. It was the electric hum of anticipation. He looked out through a gap in the tent and saw the faces of his community. He saw his mother in the front row, her eyes shining with tears of pride. He was no longer afraid of their judgment. He was buoyed by their support. Snoop and Cube stood with him, a quiet and powerful presence. They wouldn't be performing with him. This was his moment. "You ready for this?" Cube asked, his voice low. Leo looked at the crowd, then at his mentors, and nodded. "I was born ready," he said, a newfound confidence in his voice. "I just needed a little help plugging in the amp." Snoop laughed. "Go get 'em, nephew. The world is listening." As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting a golden glow over the park, the DJ's music faded out. A hush fell over the crowd, a collective holding of breath. Pops Malone walked onto the stage and took the microphone, his voice resonating with warmth and authority. He spoke about community, about second chances, and about the incredible talent that existed right here on their streets. Then, with a voice full of pride, he announced, "And now, give it up for one of our own, Leo." A wave of applause and cheers erupted, a genuine and heartfelt roar of support. Leo walked onto the stage, not with the hesitant shuffle of his past failure, but with a steady, purposeful stride. He strapped on a brand new guitar, a gift from his mentors, and approached the microphone. The bright lights didn't feel like an interrogation this time. They felt like a warm embrace. He looked out at the crowd, at the faces of his friends, family and neighbors, and he smiled. He took a deep breath, the silence stretching for a perfect, dramatic beat. Then, the opening notes of Concrete and Sunflowers filled the park. The beat, expertly crafted by Snoop, was undeniable, a smooth, soulful groove that had heads nodding instantly. It was the sound of a summer afternoon, of resilience, of home. The crowd was captivated from the very first bar, drawn into the world. He was creating. Then Leo started to sing, his voice clear and strong, carrying the weight and wisdom of his experiences. He didn't just sing the lyrics, he lived them. He painted a vivid picture of his world, The beauty and the struggle. The hope that pushes through the cracks in the pavement like a sunflower reaching for the sun. His performance was magnetic, a raw and honest testament from a young man who had found his power. The community listened, enraptured. They heard their own stories in his words. The teenagers saw their own frustrations and dreams reflected back at them. The older generation heard the echo of their own journeys, the struggles they had endured to build a life here. His mother watched from the front, tears streaming down her face, her heart overflowing with a love and pride so immense it felt like it could light up the entire city. As he moved into the song's powerful, uplifting chorus, a remarkable thing happened. People in the crowd started to sing along, their voices joining his. They had never heard the song before, but they knew it by heart because it was their truth. It was a spontaneous, beautiful moment of unity, a community finding its voice in the anthem of one of its own sons. The song belonged to them now. From the side of the stage, out of the spotlight, Snoop Dogg and Ice Cube watched the scene unfold. They didn't look like superstars. They looked like proud fathers. They saw more than a successful performance. They saw a community healing, a young man stepping into his power, and the ripple effect of a single act of mentorship. This was the return on their investment, and it was worth more than any platinum plaque. When the final note faded, the park was silent for a split second before erupting into thunderous applause. It was a cathartic release of emotion, a celebration not just of a song, but of their collective resilience. Leo stood on stage, catching his breath, the cheers washing over him. He had faced his greatest fear in the exact same place as his greatest failure, and had emerged victorious. It wasn't just a comeback, it was a rebirth. He thanked the crowd, his voice thick with emotion. He thanked his mother, Pops Malone, and then he turned his gaze to the side of the stage. And thank you to the two men who believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself, he said, his gratitude clear and profound. Snoop and Cube simply nodded back, a silent acknowledgement of the completed journey. The torch had been successfully passed. The block party continued late into the evening, but the atmosphere had changed. There was a new sense of optimism, of shared pride. Leo was no longer on stage, but in the crowd, being hugged by neighbors, and congratulated by friends. He was no longer an outcast, but a hero. He saw the impact of his music not in view counts, but in the smiles and conversations happening all around him. He understood then that the goal was never just about getting a record deal or becoming famous. It was about using his voice to uplift the place he came from. The outcome of his journey, sparked by two legends, hadn't just moved him. It had moved an entire community, reminding them of the strength and beauty that had been there all along, waiting for the right song to bring it into the light.